Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Women on the Move. My name is Marjorie Schuster, coordinator of literary events at the Temple Emmanuel Streicker Center. And as always, I'd like to thank the Samuel I. Newhouse Foundation for their support of this series. Today, we are very thrilled to welcome Liz Hirsh Naftali. Liz, you can come and say hello. There she is. Good morning, Liz.
Hi, how are you?
So Liz is a speaker, podcast host of Liz's Coffee Connection, and author of 3 books, and of course, very well known as a hostage advocate. Today, we're going to talk about Saving Abigail, where Liz tells the story of one of the youngest hostages, 3-year-old Abigail. She tells it with so much humanity and so much love, as Abigail is a member of her family. She's Abigail's great aunt. But before we get into the actual book, what I'd like to talk about are the events of October 6th and then obviously October 7th.
I went to is first, thank you for having me,
Sorry,
and
of
thank you for
course.
what you guys are doing, and for just bringing up Jewish voices, human voices through your programming. So I will take everyone back to October 6, 2023. I arrived in Israel. It was evening of Simchat Torah, Erev Simchat Torah, and I was going to visit my daughter who lives there. And I get on the plane and I ran into somebody who was a friend of mine, Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey. And Senator Booker was on his way to Israel to meet with Israelis, Palestinians, and then go throughout the Gulf region to continue the work of the Abraham Accords. And he said, "What are you doing when we get to Israel?" And I said, "I'm going to see my daughter tomorrow." And he said, "Come with us to Jerusalem. We're going to dance with the Torah, and we're going to go to dinner with this American Jewish family, and it'll be a beautiful night." And I said, "Great." I really didn't have plans on Friday night. So I was like, "Great." So we go to Jerusalem after we land, and we end up going to this beautiful Orthodox shul, and men and women separated. Now I'm on one side dancing with the Torah. Senator Booker's on the other side with the men dancing with the Torah. And it's just this magical evening, Marjorie. It's Erev Simchat Torah. Jerusalem is alive. It's just a beautiful celebration. And I look across and I see Senator Booker is dancing and happy, and I'm happy. And after this, we go to this family for a beautiful dinner. And it's just a magical evening. I go back down to Tel Aviv. Senator Booker and his team stay on in Jerusalem. And I go to sleep. And the next thing I know, at 6:30 in the morning, I'm at a hotel and the sirens are blaring. The loudspeaker in the hotel is blaring and sending us all to the stairwell. And I'll just say this, which is, having lived in Israel and been in Israel for so many years, we have become accustomed to this blaring siren, a red alert. And then we run to a safe room or a safe space. And then the day continues. We go back out and start our day. That's what Israelis, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, have been doing for years. But this morning was different. And the alarm kept blaring, and we kept going back and forth to the safe room, which was the stairwell. And it was full of people that had come to Israel to celebrate the holiday. And about an hour and a half after, I started to hear something was happening along the border with Gaza. Now, I had family that I knew, spent so much time with them on this kibbutz, this community called Kfar Aza, for many years. And I called to my sister-in-law, and she didn't answer. I called my niece, and she didn't answer. And at that moment, I called a sister-in-law in Tel Aviv, and I said, "What's going on?" And the first thing she said was that my niece Smidar and her husband and their baby girl Abigail had all been murdered that morning by Hamas terrorists in their home.
She knew already, your sister-in-law.
Yeah. And she knew because a little boy and a little girl, a 9-year-old boy named Michael, a 6-year-old girl named Amalia, my niece's son and daughter, were in a closet with a cell phone. And by that point, they had started to tell people, because they'd been connecting and telling their family, our family, where they were and what happened. So this is how that news started. And we knew this from Michael and Amalia, a 6 and a 9-year-old in a closet.
Wow. I just want to, first of all, I neglected to say there's a QR code, and please put your phone on that, ask us questions, and I'll be happy to pass them on to Liz. I want to backtrack one moment to life on the kibbutz prior to October 7th. Tell us about the kibbutz. Tell us how they lived.
So they lived in this beautiful community. And when I lived in Israel, we used to go there so often for stopovers when we were traveling in the South, for holidays, birthdays. And it's this beautiful community. It's like living in a neighborhood, green grass, children running around, dogs
Safe,
running around,
very safe, of course.
safe. And literally, children from the age of 4, 5, and 6 are walking around alone because it's a safe community. Parents and grandparents, everyone's looking out for each other, and the kids just feel very comfortable. And it's really a paradise in so many ways. And that's what a kibbutz represents in Israel. And this one in particular was just a beautiful place. My sister-in-law moved there 60 years earlier, raised her kids, her grandkids were living there, and it was just a beautiful community.
Yeah, that does sound like a nice way to live at the time. All right, so you heard the fate of your relatives and the other two children. So tell us the story. So the three children, it's a terrible story. The three children ran out. I believe they saw their mother shot, and the son-in-law. I'm sorry, what's his name? Samadar's
So
husband.
yeah, so basically, Roe, who was the father of
Sorry.
these three children,
Right.
he was a photojournalist, and his job many mornings, many times, was to run outside, snap photos of missiles coming into Israel. Because think about it, they're at the border and they're so close;
Right.
they have just
They're three
seconds.
quarters of a mile away, I think. Right. Right there.
Yes, and had went out that morning, but that morning it wasn't just missiles. He actually took photos of paragliders landing, coming into the kibbutz, terrorists landing from air. And at that point, he ran back. He understood this was a terror attack. But in the meantime, terrorists came in and they murdered my niece in front of her three kids. She was putting them in their safe room. And the kids ran outside, and he picked up the little one, Abigail, who was 3 at the time, and they all started to run. And then he was gunned down, and he fell on to Abigail. And Michael and Amalia, believing their father and sister had been killed, ran home, and they locked themselves in a closet. In their safe space, but in a closet, like a cupboard, like a clothing cupboard with a cell phone.
And they called to their grandmother with the cell
They
phone. They
called their
started calling
grandmother,
them.
they called their aunt and her uncle across the kibbutz were in their safe room with their three children. They through calls, they had another aunt who actually called her her aunt in Australia who called somebody who happened to be in the UAE who called somebody that actually connected these two children to United Hatzalah by
Wow.
way of the universe. And this beautiful woman in the north, in Rosh Pina in the north, got a call from on her phone, and it was Michael and Amalia. And this social worker named Tamar Schlesinger spent 12 hours on the phone with these children until they were saved and rescued by a special operation that evening.
Wow. And Abigail, you did not know actually what had happened to her at that time.
No, we believe we believe because these kids saw
Right.
their father who was holding her, that he was shot and killed.
So then a couple of days went by, and then how did you find out that she was in Gaza?
So we basically learned that Abigail, when they finally were able to clear this community, it took a few days between
Right.
the bodies. Over 60 people were killed on the kibbutz. Terrorists were killed. Reservists that came down to help to try to help them were killed. And by the time they could see the bodies, there was no little 3-year-old. And it was at that time we started to understand that perhaps Abigail and Hope, listen to this, Hope that a 3-year-old child was a hostage in Gaza.
Hope
And
that.
what we learned subsequently is that Abigail had survived, and she had, through a basic morning of running through a kibbutz with terrorists everywhere, arrived at a house of people she knew. And by miracle, this husband was going outside to protect the kibbutz. He was on their security detail, and he opened the door, and there was little Abigail. And we learned that he put her with his wife and 3 kids in the safe room. And we didn't know that because he was injured and he did not come back. And there were witnesses that later saw his wife and 3 kids being taken off the kibbutz, but no one actually saw Abigail.
Right.
So Marjorie was like, we put these pieces together and then understood with more intelligence as the days went on that Abigail was indeed taken as a hostage.
But she knew the family. She those were her neighbors and friends that she went to. She was 3 years old. It's so hard to imagine a 3-year-old.
And the first house she went to, no one answered the door because they were all hiding.
Oh my God. Wow. So you went back to the US. We're going to go through the story. So you went, I believe you went back to the US at that point.
I did. I went back because people, listen, my family, we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know
Right,
where this was going. And people
right.
said, go back, you'll be safer, and you can tell the story. Because even that day, I started telling the story to people all over the world
Of
because
course.
people knew I was in Israel and I had this story. And Senator Booker's team said, the State Department said people like Americans should go back to America. So I just got on a plane, went through Dubai, got back to New York, and started telling the story.
Right.
And actually started telling the story with Abigail having been killed. And then a few days later, being able to tell people through media, I did CNN very early with Abby Phillips and with others, and really being able to tell people this child is a hostage. This is a 3-year-old hostage.
Right. So I want to talk about your advocacy because then it goes into you as the great aunt, the family member, and with your connections of who you know in DC, becoming a very strong advocate.
Yeah. And, I'll be honest, like in the beginning, I just kept thinking they're going to release these 35 children under
Sure.
the age of 18. They're going to release men and women in their 70s and 80s, but it didn't happen. And I get a call one day from this woman named Sophia from North Carolina, a week into this, and she's like, I'm going to Washington, D.C. Please come tell your story. And while I did know people, Marjorie, I didn't understand that I had to start to go and fight because
Right.
I didn't really know what was going to be. But then I go to Washington, D.C. a week and a half after October 7th, and I asked for a photo, and it was that photo you showed, and it's the photo I have here of
Right.
this
Beautiful.
Abigail. And I asked for a photo because what I wanted to do was to be able to show leaders when I got there, this was the face of a hostage. And actually, one of the first people I met there, somebody I would have never met in my life if it weren't for this, was a woman named Penny Nance, evangelical Christian woman, who basically met us on the steps of the Capitol, prayed with us, and then brought us to seven Republican senator women. One was Susan Collins in specific. And Susan Collins took this picture and she came up to me, tears in her eyes. All these women, some of the most powerful women in the United States, tears in their eyes hearing about a 3-year-old child. And keep in mind, it was myself and another family. We were the first two to be in Washington, D.C. and start telling these gruesome stories one-on-one, face to face. And Susan Collins said, I'm going to do everything I can to bring this child home and all the hostages home. And I tell this in the story in the book. A few days later, she's actually in Israel with Senator Booker and a CODEL, Democrats and Republicans. And my daughter goes up to her, who's living there, and brings her this photo and says, I want to share a picture of my cousin who's been taken as a hostage. And Susan Collins pulls the picture of Abigail out of her purse and said, I got this from your family in America, and I'm going to do everything I can to bring her home. And then she went on to show the world Abigail's photo on a press conference. And so, Marjorie, that was the beginning. And on that trip, we met Democrats, Republicans, Jews, non-Jews, and we just kept telling people. And that was in the very beginning and really getting people to know, bipartisan leaders, the truth of what happened to my family and other families on October 7th.
Now, it's so powerful. Now, in the meantime, the other two children went where?
So when they were finally saved by special forces. Now, on the other side of the kibbutz is my niece and her husband and 3 children. It took 28 hours for the army to actually arrive to save them, get them off this community. But the special forces came in, literally took Mike and Amalia, grabbed them off their house, grabbed them out of the kibbutz, and drove them away. So they went to, it's a beautiful story because they actually went to the home of a doctor very nearby, and his wife and children took care of Michael and Amalia for a few hours before the family could come and get them. But then they went, and the family that were survivors from October 7th went to live with my brother-in-law and his wife in the middle of the country.
Okay, I have so many questions about the
Yeah.
kids, but at the later we'll kind of go through everything. So I want to talk about the hostage families who all got together, went to see Biden, tried to see Netanyahu. Tell me a little bit about all of that, what went on with you. You were one of the leaders, clearly.
Well, there were actually kind of interesting for people to understand who are listening. There were American families. There were 12 hostages that were taken that day. There were I think there were 46 Americans killed on October 7th. So We understood early. President Biden actually went to Israel within the first week and a half, showed up, supported the families. Before even that, he was on a Zoom call with American families. At that point, we didn't even know Abigail was a hostage. But he came to Israel with his team. But then when he went back, he made hostage release a priority for his administration. So the American families were meeting with his team, which was National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, Special Envoy Brett McGurk, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. Now, I'd been involved in helping elect leaders, but I had never been involved in being in those kind of meetings. But what they did was they had these hostage families, the American hostage families, meeting on a pretty regular basis with these leaders in Israel and in America and at the White House for the entire time that President Biden was in office. But in those early weeks that we were there, we had a lot of meetings that were very small, with mostly with Jake Sullivan and Brett McGurk. But then we'd be in Israel, and I'd go back to Israel back and forth, and we'd have meetings with Secretary of State Blinken. And just to give people an understanding, after meetings with us, Secretary of State Blinken would literally go outside and meet with Israeli hostage families because their leadership was not showing up for them.
Right. So,
But
yes,
I want to just add one more piece to it.
certainly.
Americans had that, but all the hostage families, it didn't matter what religion, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, atheist, people that were coming from Europe, people were coming from Israel, were not really getting any support from the leadership in Israel. But the US Congress, Democrats and Republicans, were meeting with these people throughout this whole hostage crisis. And most of this was done by AJC, which was organizing these meetings so that people could come and tell their stories. And I was a part of both sides.
Okay. Do you feel that the Israeli government was correct because they prioritized the war?
I was asked that question many times,
Right.
and my answer, my people asked me, do you think that they were doing enough?
Okay.
And I always said no. Until every hostage is back, the Israeli government will not have done enough. Listen, I'm very honest. I love Israel. I support Israel. I think the Israeli people are amazing. I know how they came together for hostage families to support them, how the Israeli people came when their army had to start to figure out how to bring troops down to the border right away. They weren't prepared, and the Israeli people were sending food and coming with clothing and machinery and things. And like the Israeli people were phenomenal. But when there was a vote to bring home 105 women and children, there were people, leaders that voted against that deal because they prioritized the destruction of Hamas over Abigail and children. So Marjorie, for me as a hostage advocate, I will always say they did not do enough to bring home the hostages.
Yeah. How about the media? I mean, I think the hostage advocacy got the media to get involved much more. Is that correct?
Yeah, listen, the media understood
Yes.
that there was crisis, there was terror, there was horror,
The human
and
story they went
and
for,
these
of
were
course.
human stories. And so I think that and one of the things that the hostage families were able to do was to really tell their stories and to be very powerful. And even with rising anti-Semitism and people rewriting history after it happened and people denying October 7th, and we saw everything, the hostage families and the people around the world that supported them, Jews and Christians and Muslims, it wasn't just Jews, the people supporting them carried this movement so that nobody could ever forget them and that the media would cover these people until each last person was brought home.
And tell me what you personally did. What media did you go on, and how did you do this?
I mean, I started early by doing CNN. Maria Shriver called and asked me to do her podcast, and it just started to go through everything from
That's great.
Fox,
Yeah.
News Nation, Newsmax. And then one of the things was that because Abigail was a 3-year-old child and her birthday was coming up, and she was someone that President Biden also spoke about because she was a 3-year-old child. And he understood that this was the face of a hostage, one of 35 children that were stolen. So there was also her 4th birthday was coming up as there was a hostage deal. So people wanted to hear about her birthday, and I wanted to talk about it because our goal was please bring this child home before her, God forbid, she spent her fourth birthday as a hostage, which she did.
Oh. And her grandparents, how did they manage through this?
There's just no words.
There's no
Look, they were
words.
broken. The aunt and uncle, the sister, brother, cousins, everybody broken. They buried Smidar in Row E. I think it
Right,
was 11 days after October 7th. They didn't know if Abigail was going to make it back. No one knew. But I promised them one thing. I was going to stay in America, and everything I could do by myself and with other hostage families. But in the beginning, it really was just myself and Lucy Siegel, who was Keith Siegel's sister from the same community. The two of us were there right from the beginning, fighting like crazy and making sure people knew. But what I told my family was, I'm going to let you take care of what you need to in Israel and these children, because everything really was about the children, Marjorie. For my sister-in-law, the grandmother, it was about the children at this moment. She knew her daughter was gone, but she was going to do everything. And she would even call me and say, are you going to save Abigail? And let me tell you something, and I'll tell everyone who's listening, I had no idea, but I said yes. Because that's what you do. You just say, I am going to keep hope and courage alive and do everything I can to bring home this child. And that's really what I did for
right,
50 days until she came back. And then kept doing it because I looked at it and I thought Abigail was home, but
right.
we still had over 150 people whose Abigails weren't home.
Um, right. Now, we get to 51 days and exactly what happened then when they released Abigail.
So it was the third day of the release.
Okay,
The first day we see women and children, and Abigail wasn't on that list. And we knew the day before that she wasn't going to be on that list. And you're crushed, but you see these little children and these women coming out, and you're thankful and appreciating. And then the second day, same thing, she didn't make that list. But again, children and women are coming out. And on that third day, we got notice that she was going to be out. But until I saw Abigail in my niece and sister-in-law's arms, I couldn't believe it. I even got a call, and so did my brother-in-law Dory in Israel. We both got calls from President Biden. And he called just to say that Abigail was not only released and free, but she had passed into Israel. But even then, I could not until I saw that photo of my niece Theron and my sister-in-law Shlomit holding Abigail. I couldn't breathe. And at that moment, I was like, okay, she's safe.
what was she like when she initially came home?
So initially, like she, like all the hostages and especially the children, they went to hospital and they were tested and checked.
Right.
And look, in the beginning, I think when I write about this, she was emaciated. She had been starved. She had been
She's only
silent.
3, not even 4 years old.
And she knew when she went in that her parents had been killed. And she spent 51 days. But this woman, Hagar, took care of her. And we prayed that Hagar was with her for the 51 days because we did not know what was going on in
And Hagar
Gaza.
had her own 3 children,
Hagar
right?
had
So she
her three
took care of the
children,
four, right?
4, 8, and 10, and Abigail.
Well,
But
she's a
she took care
saint.
of Abigail. She is a saint. She's incredible. And she took care of Abigail like her own child. So Abigail was loved, but these 4 children were starved and silenced and dirty, no hygiene. And they were in buildings that were demolished by IDF bombs and moved. And they had nothing to play with, nothing to do all day. But this woman, Hagar, kept their souls and their hope alive. So when Abigail came back and knew that she had no parents, she had a grandmother, she had a grandfather, aunts and uncles, and then she saw her brother and sister and her cousins,
Right.
and that brought her back to her smiles.
She's such a young child that it would be very hard for her to grasp that information. No, a little kid doesn't really even understand that. And also, I don't know how they kept the children quiet all day long, little children,
Yeah,
but that
they had
woman,
to. They
yeah,
had to. Hagar knew that in order to survive, she had to keep them quiet, and they were yelled at and told to be quiet. So they understood, and these kids understood what they were up against as well.
Now, how did you actually, even if you don't mind telling everybody, how did you actually know Cory Booker? I know that somehow Huma Abedin is a friend of yours, maybe Hillary Clinton. How are you involved with everybody?
So I like to tell you all this that before October 7th, I was a Democrat. I believed in helping to elect people that represented who I thought our country was. And I was very much about electing women and people of color. And I thought this was something I could do. And it was very powerful for me to be able to help elect people. So I met a lot of people in this process. But I did wake up on October 7th, and all of a sudden, then there was Abigail as a hostage. And what I understood was that I was no longer a Democrat. I was just an American. And I was an American who thought that I could do things and I understood things. Everything got thrown out. And I just understood that I was desperate. I needed support. And I've got to tell you, throughout this process, I found amazing support from Democrats and Republicans, because what I understood is if we talk about the heart and humanity of our leaders and we talk to them about heart and humanity, we have something that we can do together. And I just want to add that you mentioned that I have this podcast called Liz's Coffee Connection. And I had started this in the spring of 2023 because what I understood just intuitively, I thought, this is ridiculous. When my parents were involved in life, and young, people were talking, Democrats and Republicans. They didn't get along on all the politics, but they got along. So I thought, like, I'm going to start a podcast where we talk about heart and humanity. And I had Dems and Republicans.
Great.
I've had somebody like Steve Scalise and someone like Hakeem Jeffries. And the point was that we could talk about heart and humanity, and then we could come together. And so after October 7th, when I did this work, and these hostage families that I was doing the work with, we had Democrats and Republicans that were there and helping and working together to fight to bring home the hostages. So yes, I did know more Democrats, and I knew Senator Booker and I knew Secretary Clinton. But what I also started to learn was that we had allies on both sides and that we had to work together in order to bring home these hostages.
Did you ever meet with Netanyahu?
Yeah, so I write about it in the book. You know, people very early on did not meet with Netanyahu in Israel. And I'm not an Israeli, so I did not even really push that channel. But Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu and his team were invited to by Speaker Johnson to come and speak at the Congress in July of 2024.
Right.
And we were invited to be at that. And then we were invited, I pushed because it was really important for us to try to get a meeting with President Biden, who was really leading the advocacy at that point. Abigail was released. But President Biden was still leading the advocacy. And I really write about this. And I say it, if it were not for President Biden's leadership and his team, Sullivan and McGurk and everyone with the mediation of the Qataris, I do not think that Abigail would have been released. And so I understood that the power of our leadership was in America to bring home these hostages. And Netanyahu was coming. So I thought, with the other hostage families for the Americans, let's get a meeting. And as we were trying to get that meeting, we also were invited to a meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu. So I met with him in this small group of hostage families, and we had a conversation, and I spoke directly with him. And then 2 days later, we met at the White House with President Biden, hostage families, and Prime Minister Netanyahu with Ron Dermer and Gal Hirsh. And it was a very intimate for a White House meeting. And it was at that meeting that something just rose inside of me. I saw these people crying. I saw Viva Siegel crying because Keith was there. I saw Yella Alexander crying because her son Dawn was a hostage, an American kid. And just something inside of me, and I started to direct questions at both Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden about getting these hostages out. And that's what I write about in the book, because I had no idea what I was doing, but something inside of me just was like, we've got to get answers. It's been almost a year, and there's still over 100 people that are being held hostage, and we know majority of them are alive.
They were lucky they had you, and obviously all the families. Now I want to bring it to your book. This is your third book that you've written, correct? And primarily your books are about Israel, right?
Yeah.
The land of Israel. Great. So now you decided to write this unbelievable story about Abigail, and tell us about that. Did you leave things out? Did you learn things along the way? Did this pull it all together for you? Tell us a little bit about that process.
Well, early on, people were saying, make sure you keep notes. And I remember, and we were in a meeting with Jake Sullivan once, and all the families were taking notes, and I was taking a lot of notes. And he looked at me and he goes, "You're taking way too many notes," and like in a sweet way. And I understood that if I didn't, and all the families took notes, I mean, really, we all were just so trying to keep focused, and there was so much going
Yes.
on. But one of the reasons why I wrote the book very early on was because I wanted people to know the truth of what happened to my family and many families on October 7th. And I wanted to know about people to know the resilience and the diversity. How many people that we had no idea were going to be our allies came in and supported us and did so much worldwide and in Washington, D.C. to help the hostage families. And I also wanted to tell the story from like Abigail, this child who was miraculously surviving so many things. And this was a book about me also thinking like, okay, I'm helping and I'm doing all this stuff. But then on October 7th, it became a desperate effort to help bring home Abigail and then all the hostages, something I did not know how to do. And I hoped that by writing this, it would actually help others. Now, just put into perspective, when I wrote this, there were still many hostages. I didn't have big press parties. I didn't do big celebrations. There were hostages. It wasn't appropriate. So I never made the book about me and about parties and book touring. But what I made it about was making sure I could get into rooms and make sure that from even the perspective of Abigail being released, there were still Americans and there were still many, many hostages, a lot from Israel, but people from all over the world that were being held. And so for me, Saving Abigail was a story about saving Abigail and then how to keep saving ourselves and working together and keeping hope alive. And then it was also about like, how do we move forward? And it's about advocacy. And at this point, thankfully, we have all the hostages home. But we still have advocacy, I believe, for Israel. We have advocacy for Jews. We have advocacy to tell the truth of October 7th. But I think we just have advocacy for humanity right now, which is how do we tell a story and how do we fight and work together? And I know that many people who are listening today, I have friends on this call and people that showed up, and I just am grateful for them and grateful for everybody because everyone who's listening today played a part. And so this is a book that is about how everybody can continue to play a part. You know, Elie Wiesel said, once you bear witness, then you are telling, once somebody bears witness, they are then the witness and they need to go out and tell those stories. And so for me, I wanted to bear witness to what happened to my family. And I hope others will use this moment and this time in history to keep telling these stories.
Right. So Abigail, only being 3, 4 years old, couple of questions. Will she remember this and trauma as a little child? Do you think it's different the way she would process it as a 3-year-old, 4-year-old?
Of course. I mean, she was 3, but she was a 3-year-old on her way to being 4 who understood that she had to go out from under her father's body, covered in his blood, and go find somebody to help her. And that is a child that is quite unique while you think
Yes.
about there's over 300 terrorists, heavily armed men on this kibbutz trying to
And
kill
she had
people.
never seen, sorry to interrupt, most children have never experienced anything like that. It's quite
No,
unusual.
no. And she knows she was in Gaza. And as I think about it, like this woman, Hagar, kept taking care of her soul and showed her that she was loved. And that was something that Abigail had. Um, and now she and her siblings live with their aunt and uncle. They've been adopted. So there's a beautiful family of 6 children. And my niece and her husband, Laron and Zoli, raising these beautiful children. And my sister-in-law, Shlomit, is there almost every day helping. And my family and all of us, my kids and my all of the relatives that are very close are there supporting. And Abigail's now 6. And these kids are loved, but they all know what happened on October 7th. And while we say she was little, yes, I think in time she will go forward and she will be loved. And that will, I believe, give her what we want for all of our children, which is a future that is safe and secure. But she will, do not get me wrong, she and her siblings and the cousins who were across the kibbutz for 29 hours, silenced in their safe room, they're just 6 children, but there are thousands of children around Israel who are all traumatized and will carry this and their families for generations. And it's not about me trying to be negative, but it's a reminder that this has reverberated not only throughout Israel, But I know so many people and their families throughout the world, their children have been affected by October 7th in a way that is going to stay with them for the rest of their lives.
And someday Abigail can read this book and her siblings can read this book because probably, hopefully, Abigail will forget some of these terrible things that happened to her.
Yeah, and
Hopefully.
I hope that these kids will read the book and know how many people came and
Good.
showed up and loved them. And that these children, people were fighting for them and other hostages, people were out there fighting. And this is one book, and there's going to be many books, and people really, everybody's story is going to be so important. But this one, because it tells a 3-year-old child, Anne Frank is a story that people think about from the Holocaust. It's one that
Right.
is understandable from all religions because it's about children. And for me, this book about Abigail is something that I want people to understand whether they're Jewish or not. This is what happened to a child and her siblings on this horrific day.
So we're going to talk about Abigail in a moment and some of the wonderful things that have happened since. But how about the other two kids who were very young themselves, 6 and 9? And how old are they now? 9 and 12, I guess.
8 and 11.
Okay. And how are they? Because being a little bit older, it might have even been harder for them, potentially.
I've seen them over the last couple years just really opening, and you can still see there's a heaviness. They do carry it. They understand it, especially Michael. He's older. And he was the one that was with the social worker on the phone and with the police and having to do things. And Amalia was there with him. And they know what happened. But Michael's a phenomenal soccer player, and he is on a
Oh, good.
soccer team. So he gets to do what little kids, young people get to do, which is play soccer. And he's very proud and he's really good. And Amalia has lots of friends and she's very smart. And Abigail's an incredible dancer. And these kids are just loved. And Marjorie, we don't know, but all I know is that they are loved and they are cared for, and they are getting everything they can get in order to move forward in a way that we would want for all of our children.
So what was the reaction to this book?
I think that for the most part, this book is one of the most incredibly fair books in terms of partisanship, in terms of me explaining the role I played, but giving so much credit to so many people. It's not a me story, it's an us story. But I also think that this is the book that sort of gives me the entree into rooms. And I've spoken in Jewish communities and traveled with evangelical Christian communities in Australia, in the UK, in Ireland. What this book does is it gives people an opportunity to hear my story, but also to be like we are today in conversation. And it's a story that isn't about 2.5 years ago, and that's it. It's a historical piece that we will be, as you said, talking about forever, and people will be able to refer to it as what happened in this period of time.
I would love to talk about the present day a little bit of Abigail at Disneyland, White House, some of the better parts of this. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, Abigail and the family, 6 children, 2 adults, they have come to the United States a
So
few
that's the
times.
new family, the parents.
That's the new family.
Okay.
So there's 6 kids. And they are a beautiful family. Like the kids are all looking out for each other. And even though I always say, even though Abigail's the youngest, she sort of she runs everybody because she's just got that personality.
She must be a special child.
She is quite special. Um, but we were invited in 2024 to the White House, and President Biden met with the kids, talked with the kids. They all drew art for him, and he accepted the art, and it was really beautiful. And it was in a meeting with just him. He had no staff, and he met with my
Wow.
niece and her husband and talked about the process of mourning and moving forward from his own personal experience. And he spent time with the kids, and he took us outside so they could see the play, equipment that his grandchildren were swinging on.
Really?
And
Wow.
it was really beautiful. And it was that moment also where I saw these kids running around in the Oval Office. And I thought about Abigail being held in the dark, a dark room, dirty and starving for 51 days, and then coming to the White House and being in the Oval Office, and that it represented America, democracy, freedom. And that was and we were supposed to be there for half an hour. We were there for like an hour and a half. And it was just a beautiful moment. And Abigail didn't really understand that this was the president of the United States. The big kids did. And
She's a
she was
little
calling
tiny
him
girl.
Joe, like she was like Joe. And, but
That's
it
funny.
was really a beautiful moment. And then we went to subsequent visits. And I say this because I wanted the kids to meet the leaders and the Democrats and the Republicans in the House and the Senate. Senator Jackie Rosen, Senator Susan Collins, a Democrat and Republican, they had a meet and greet, doing art with the kids. Senators were sitting doing art,
That's
Dems and
amazing.
Republicans. And then we did the same thing with the House. We had Mike Lawler, Republican, Richie Torres, a Democrat, and they hosted it. And what I also saw was that our leaders could see when they work together, they save lives. And I like to tell this story because I think it's a really interesting piece on how much Abigail knows. You asked what she'll
Yeah.
remember. And we had just finished the meeting, this event at the house, and we went outside and we're waiting for the Ubers. And Abigail said, I have to go to the bathroom. And I said, I'll take her back. Now, to go back in the house buildings, you've got to go through security, you got to go down the hallway. And I take her down, and the bathroom is on the right, and on the left is Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz's office. And the wall is full of pictures of all the hostages because
Really?
many of the leaders had their walls and their doors with hostage photos.
Good.
It showed who had been released, who was still there. And this was in 2025 in the spring. And Abigail stops and she looks at the wall. And a gentleman comes out, and I said, she sees herself on the wall. And he goes back in, and a minute later, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz walks out. She gets on the ground with Abigail, and she's looking, and I'm talking with them. And Abigail looks at the Bebis boys, and she said, they were killed. And then she sees Ziv and Gali Berman, who were her neighbors from this kibbutz community, Kfar Aza, and she said, they're still in Gaza. And
Yeah.
then she sees her picture, and she sees, and I explained to her that it says that she has been released. She knows. Everyone knows. And so I say that just so everybody that's listening, she was 3 years old. When she saw that, she was 5 years old. She knows. All these children understand what happened that day. And all the people that are here listening, we're going to do everything we can to support the kids, everybody that is going to survive from this day, but it will stay with all of us for the rest of our lives.
What do they ask about their parents?
I don't really talk about that in this way because I think it's something very personal. They're children. They know that what happened, and each one in their own way has gone through it. My niece Lerone has spoken about Amalia, and so I can talk about that in public. Like she talked about how in the beginning she would give Amalia like a shower, and Amalia would tell things that happened while she was showering, and then afterwards put on her pajamas and go play with the kids. So every child processes it differently, and these children are in a place where they can have whatever conversations, and each of these children are six, and all these kids that were affected, they have therapists. Everybody is
Good.
is in
Okay, of
therapy.
course.
So they have
Um,
somebody also to work with outside of just the family.
can you tell us just a little bit about your niece and nephew? I'd really like to hear some lovely stories of them.
Of Smadar and Roe.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm sure they were terrific people.
Look, they were. And, they loved the kibbutz. And Smadar was from the kibbutz. And Roe and Smadar met at a gas station nearby. And then they decided to raise their kids there. And he was a photographer, and he had many friends on this kibbutz. And he was just a guy that was very social with his people. And the house that Abigail actually went to was the house of his best friend,
Okay, so
Avichai Brodich. Now, my niece Smadar, I've known her since she was almost Abigail's age. She was a bit shy, but she was always this beautiful, very intelligent, very special little girl. And she grew up into a very beautiful and very intelligent woman who basically all she wanted to do was take care of her three children. And she loved them. She was an amazing person. She was very smart. And people know this now. She was working in insecurity in the country, but her number one priority was her children. And she did everything to make sure that they were safe and secure. And even that morning, the first thing she was doing was putting them in the safe room. And she was just a very special woman. And I think about today Memorial Day in Israel,
Yes.
and my family is been, having memorial services. Her birthday was a week ago. I was in Israel with my sister-in-law on her birthday. These are just painful things because Smidar was just so much part of everybody's life. And every time we see these three kids and they have a birthday or a soccer game, you realize their mom and dad aren't there.
It's so emotional. It's really it. And tell us just your advocacy continues clearly, right?
Yeah.
What's next for you?
So I don't know that there's next. I think there is the continuing of telling the truth of October 7th. But I think when I speak, and I speak quite often throughout the country and throughout the world, and my goal is to try to speak to, yes, the Jewish community, but people not in the Jewish communities, people in Muslim and Christian communities, because we know that anti-Semitism is rampant. It's everywhere. But what I also learned in this process, there's a lot of really good people that we have, as Jews, we have failed to actually reach out and share our stories and talk about who we are. And that's what I spend a lot of time doing. I continue on the podcast talking to so many
Right.
leaders that are very different and having hard conversations, Marjorie, because I hope that by example, my having hard conversations, or what I would say challenging ones, not speaking to within our bubble and not staying on our side, those conversations are, I hope, inspiring. And I hope people today are going to be inspired to, one, what I believe is every day be kind, every day go out and do something good for others. But also then find what you're passionate about, is what I tell people, and go and fight for it. Go and do what you believe. And even though we all do a lot, and I believe everybody listening here is already doing a lot, I thought I was before October 7th.
Wow.
And
Okay.
October 7th got me to understand that we can do more. And so for me now, it's sort of putting hope out there, keeping hope alive, and not just a hope like I hope that tomorrow I'm going to, find a really good ice cream store, but hope, that courageous hope, and that love thy neighbor is really about love thy neighbor, having difficult conversations, talking to people that are just maybe somebody that you would not really normally want to talk to, but by talking to them, you start to figure out how we can move forward. Because I think I've mentioned this through our talk, this work now is about humanity. It doesn't matter who our president is, it doesn't matter who our congressional leaders are, but what does matter is how we treat each other and how we actually want the world to be. And then we want to have leaders that also do those kind of things and that represent us in that common humanity. But I believe it starts with each and every one of us. And so, like, what we are is each of us is a light. And each of our light coming together and shining bright is how we come out of this darkness. And I believe we are in darkness. I just spent a month in Israel running to bomb shelters.
Yeah.
And then my granddaughter was born. And I saw light again. And so it's that constant reminder of what we can do and how we can move forward. And that's what I hope to be a part of, is that continuing conversation, because I believe in the better of all of us. I just think sometimes we need to help push each other to get to that place.
Your message is absolutely beautiful and wonderful. And thank you for all your advocacy. And thank you for this wonderful book, which, by the way, whoever's watching, please read it. It is really inspiring. It's a story of Abigail, story of Liz, and it's worth reading. I want to thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. And we had a lot of people listening. And keep up the good fight, right?
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me. And thank you again for doing the work that you guys are doing at Temple Emmanuel Streicker Center. I
Thank
hope I
you.
can come back and bring people and have more dialogue, because I believe these are those conversations, Marjorie, and the work you're doing that are going to bring us into more days of light and intelligence in how we treat each other, and kindness and humanity.
Thank you. Liz and I actually met a few months ago when Ellie Sharabi was with us at the
Yeah,
Streicker Center, and I knew about Liz's book clearly. I read it, and I went over to her and I said, I really would love you to be on our Women on the Move program. So yes, so we try to do what we do at Temple Emmanuel, and you do what you do, and please come visit us again in person when you're back in New York.
I will. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for coming and listening today. And please, everybody, go out and just keep doing good work, and start with just being kind to yourself and kind to others.
It's a very good message. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Liz, and enjoy wherever you are.
Bye.
Bye-bye.